Sometimes trades end up making a front office look genius. Jerome Bettis going to the Steelers, Steve Largent to the Seahawks, and Randy Moss to the Patriots are all examples of well thought out trades. However, those are a whole lot less fun to talk about than the dumpster fire front office decisions we'll be talking about today. Today, we'll be doing over 10 of the worst trades in NFL history, how they destroyed their franchise, and just how bad they went. The New Orleans Saints' decision to trade away an unprecedented haul of draft picks to acquire running back Ricky Williams in the 1999 NFL Draft remains one of the most criticized moves in NFL history. In a move driven by head coach Mike Ditka's belief that Williams was a once-in-a-generation talent, the Saints traded their entire collection of 1999 draft picks for a total of 8 and their first and third round picks in 2000 to the Washington Redskins. This trade gave the Saints the number 5 overall pick, which they used to select Williams, the Heisman Trophy-winning running back from Texas. The move left the Saints with only one draft pick in 1999, Williams, while gutting their ability to build depth or address other team needs. The pressure on Williams was immense from the start, as he was seen as the savior of a franchise that had struggled to find consistent success. His rookie season, however, fell short of expectations. Though Williams displayed flashes of brilliance, he was limited to 884 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns due to injuries that kept him off the field for 6 games. The team finished with a dismal 3-13 record, putting even more scrutiny on the decision to trade away so much for one player. In his second season, Williams improved significantly, rushing for 1,000 yards in just 10 games before another injury cut his season short. While his talent was undeniable, the Saints struggled to build a competitive roster around him, a direct result of the draft capital they had sacrificed. By 2002, after 3 seasons of unfulfilled promise, the Saints traded Williams to the Miami Dolphins for 2 first-round picks, signaling their acceptance that the gamble had failed. While the Dolphins eventually benefited from Williams' peak performance, he led the NFL in rushing in 2002 with 1,800 yards. The Saints were left to rebuild from the wreckage of the trade. The Redskins, who initially benefited from the wealth of picks, did not fare much better, as poor drafting squandered the opportunity to turn the trade into sustained success. Williams' career in New Orleans serves as a reminder that even the most talented player cannot carry a team alone, especially when the rest of the roster is weakened by the loss of vital resources. The trade crippled the Saints' ability to address other areas of need, leaving the team imbalanced and ill-equipped to compete. Though Williams went on to have a productive NFL career, including a Pro Bowl appearance and a rushing title in Miami, it highlights the importance of building a well-rounded team and the dangers of pinning a franchise's hopes on a single individual, no matter how talented. The Denver Broncos' blockbuster trade for Russell Wilson was supposed to be the move that brought them back into Super Bowl contention. However, it's increasingly clear that this deal may go down as one of the biggest missteps in franchise history. In March 2022, the Broncos sent a king's ransom to the Seattle Seahawks in exchange for Wilson. The trade package included 2 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks, a 5th-rounder, quarterback Drew Lock, tight end Noah Fant, and defensive lineman Shelby Harris. On paper, it was a massive haul, with Denver betting big on the 33-year-old quarterback to reinvigorate their offense and return them to glory. Wilson's career in Denver, however, was underwhelming to say the least. In his first season with the Broncos in 2022, Wilson struggled mightily, finishing with career lows in touchdowns, completion percentage, and passer rating. The offense, expected to soar with Wilson at the helm, became one of the least productive units in the league, averaging just 16.9 points per game, ranking 32nd overall. The struggles prompted the firing of first-year head coach Nathaniel Hackett before the season even ended, casting further doubt on the team's direction. To compound the issue, the Broncos had already doubled down on their commitment to Wilson by signing him to a 5-year, $245 million contract extension, including $165 million guaranteed. With his hefty cap hit and underperformance, the trade has left Denver in a precarious position, lacking the draft capital to make significant roster improvements. Meanwhile, the Seahawks have thrived, leveraging the draft picks to build a younger, more dynamic team, while their new quarterback, Geno Smith, delivered a Pro Bowl-worthy season in 2022. In 2023, Wilson did play better, but he and Sean Payton ended up butting heads, and he was out of Denver just 2 years after being traded. The Broncos were so unimpressed with his play that they were willing to eat tens of millions of dollars in dead cap just to move him to the Steelers. The Steelers were able to sign a Super Bowl winning quarterback for the veteran minimum, and since then, he has been leading the Steelers to much more success than he ever saw in Denver. While some will say Russell Wilson is past his prime, the Broncos giving up so much just to release him 2 years later is pretty embarrassing for their front office. The Philadelphia Eagles' decision to pass on Warren Sapp in the 1995 NFL Draft and trade the pick to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers stands as one of the most lopsided trade decisions in NFL history. The Eagles entered the draft with a strong need to bolster their defense and had the 12th overall pick, a prime spot to select Sapp, a standout defensive tackle from the University of Miami. However, due to concerns about Sapp's off-field issues, rumors that ultimately proved exaggerated, the Eagles traded the pick to Tampa Bay. The Buccaneers selected Sapp, while the Eagles moved back in the draft to gain additional picks. The Buccaneers didn't stop there. With the 28th overall pick, they selected linebacker Derrick Brooks, creating a legendary draft haul that became the foundation of their defense for over a decade. Together, Sapp and Brooks helped transform Tampa Bay into a perennial playoff contender and eventually a Super Bowl champion in 2002. Sapp went on to record 96.5 career sacks, earn 7 Pro Bowl selections, and cement himself as one of the best defensive tackles in NFL history. Brooks, a cerebral and consistent linebacker, became a 9-time Pro Bowler and was named NFL Defensive Player of the Year in 2002. Both players were first ballot Hall of Famers. Meanwhile, the Eagles' haul from the trade fell flat. The team used the picks they acquired to draft players who failed to make a significant impact, leaving the Eagles without the defensive cornerstone they desperately needed. Throughout the late 1990s, Philadelphia struggled to find its footing as a franchise, missing the playoffs in multiple seasons, while Tampa Bay's defense became a force to be reckoned with. While the Buccaneers built a dynasty-level defense around their savvy picks, the Eagles were left wondering what might have been if they had taken the chance on Warren Sapp. The Green Bay Packers' trade for quarterback John Hadl in 1974 is widely regarded as one of the most disastrous trades in NFL history. In an attempt to solve their quarterback issues, the Packers traded an astonishing amount of draft capital to the Los Angeles Rams. First-round picks in 1975 and 1976, second-round picks in 1975 and 1976, and a third-round pick in 1975. The price tag was exorbitant, especially for a quarterback who was past his prime at 34 years old. At the time, the Packers were desperate for stability at quarterback after years of struggling to replace Bart Starr, their legendary signal caller. The Rams, meanwhile, were happy to part ways with Hadl, as they had already found success with younger quarterback James Harris. Green Bay's gamble on Hadl was intended to jumpstart their floundering offense and restore the franchise to its former glory. However, the move backfired spectacularly. Hadl's tenure with the Packers was a disappointment from the start. He joined the team midway through the 1974 season and played poorly, throwing 3 touchdowns to 8 interceptions while leading the Packers to a 3-3 finish. In 1975, Hadl's performance declined further, as he threw for 6 touchdowns against a staggering 21 interceptions, leading the Packers to a 4-10 record. Instead of becoming the savior the team needed, Hadl's struggles further entrenched Green Bay in mediocrity. The cost of the trade only compounded its failure. The Rams used the picks acquired from Green Bay to build a strong foundation for their franchise. Among the players they selected were key contributors who helped propel Los Angeles to sustained success throughout the 1970s. Meanwhile, the Packers were left without valuable draft capital, crippling their ability to rebuild and prolonging their struggles throughout the decade. The Hadl trade is a classic example of how desperation and poor decision-making can set a franchise back for years. It wasn't until the arrival of Brett Favre in the 1990s that the Packers finally found long-term stability at the quarterback position. The Deshaun Watson trade, completed in March 2022, was one of the most polarizing deals in NFL history, both for its monumental price tag and the controversies surrounding the quarterback. The Cleveland Browns made a massive move to acquire Watson from the Houston Texans, sending a haul of draft picks that included 3 first-rounders, a third-round pick, and 2 fourth-round picks. Additionally, they signed Watson to an unprecedented 5-year, fully guaranteed $230 million contract, the richest guaranteed deal in NFL history at the time. The Browns' gamble on Watson was centered on his undeniable talent. During his time in Houston, Watson established himself as one of the NFL's elite quarterbacks, leading the league in passing yards in 2020 and earning 3 Pro Bowl selections. His combination of accuracy, mobility, and leadership on the field made him a highly sought-after player despite his off-field issues. However, at the time of the trade, Watson was facing numerous allegations of sexual misconduct, which had sidelined him for the entirety of the 2021 season and cast a dark cloud over his career. Cleveland's decision to pursue Watson came with immediate backlash. Fans and analysts questioned the ethics of investing so heavily in a player embroiled in legal battles, with over 20 civil lawsuits pending against him. The trade also had significant financial implications as the Browns restructured Watson's contract to minimize potential losses in the event of a suspension, effectively betting the franchise's future on his ability to rebound. On the field, the early returns on the trade were less than stellar. Watson served an 11-game suspension in 2022 and struggled to regain his prior form upon his return, completing just 58.2% of his passes with 7 touchdowns and 5 interceptions in 6 games. The Browns finished the season 7-10, missing the playoffs and leaving questions about whether Watson could justify the enormous investment. Even this year, he's been knocked out with a season-ending injury while collecting nearly $50 million a year from the Browns and dealing with his lawsuits. Meanwhile, the Texans used the draft capital acquired from the trade to accelerate their rebuilding process. With multiple high-value picks, Houston gained the tools to strengthen its roster and plan for the future. Contrasting with Cleveland's all-in approach, they got CJ Stroud, who is looking like he might actually be a better player than Watson ever was. And Cleveland still has very little to show for itself despite making one of the biggest trades in football history. The Indianapolis Colts trade for Jeff George in 1990 remains one of the most infamous deals in NFL history. Desperate for a franchise quarterback, the Colts sent a massive package to the Atlanta Falcons that included Pro Bowl offensive lineman Chris Hinton, rising star wide receiver Andre Rison, and a future first-round pick in exchange for the first overall pick in the draft. With that pick, the Colts selected George, a physically gifted quarterback from the University of Illinois. While the move showcased Indianapolis's commitment to finding a long-term answer at quarterback, the results were disastrous. Jeff George entered the league with high expectations, as his cannon arm and raw talent made him one of the most hyped prospects of his era. However, his tenure in Indianapolis was plagued by inconsistency, clashes with coaches, and a lack of leadership. In his 4 seasons with the Colts, George posted a disappointing 14-35 record as a starter, throwing 41 touchdowns against 46 interceptions. His inability to live up to his potential, combined with a tendency to alienate teammates and coaches, quickly turned him into a polarizing figure. He literally played in more games than he had touchdowns. The trade's cost made matters worse for Indianapolis. Chris Hinton, a 6-time Pro Bowler, continued his stellar career with the Falcons, solidifying their offensive line. Andre Rison emerged as one of the NFL's premier wide receivers, earning 5 Pro Bowl selections and becoming a consistent threat in Atlanta's offense. To add insult to injury, the future first-round pick sent to Atlanta allowed the Falcons to select Shane Curry, though Curry's career was tragically cut short. While George would go on to have some success later in his career with other teams, his stint with the Colts was emblematic of the franchise's struggles during the early 1990s. The trade left Indianapolis without key building blocks and further delayed their ability to field a competitive team. For the Falcons, the deal was a significant win, providing them with cornerstone players and draft capital to improve their roster. The Oakland Raiders trade for Antonio Brown in 2019 was one of the most chaotic sagas in recent NFL history. Desperate to inject life into their receiving core, the Raiders acquired Brown from the Pittsburgh Steelers in exchange for a 3rd and 5th round draft pick. On paper, it seemed like a steal for Oakland, as Brown was widely considered one of the best wide receivers in the league. Coming off 6 straight seasons with over 1,200 receiving yards, Brown's talent was unquestionable. However, the deal would quickly unravel into a complete disaster for the Raiders. From the beginning, Brown's tenure with the Raiders was fraught with controversy. It started with a bizarre incident in which he suffered frostbite on his feet due to improper use of a cryotherapy machine. This was followed by a prolonged standoff over his helmet, as Brown refused to use a league-approved design, even filing grievances against the NFL. The saga became a media circus, overshadowing the Raiders training camp and raising questions about his commitment to the team. Things only got worse. Brown repeatedly clashed with the Raiders management, including a heated altercation with general manager Mike Mayock. Reports surfaced that Brown threatened to punch Mayock and had to be restrained by teammates. His erratic behavior reached a breaking point when he posted a private phone call with head coach John Gruden on social media. Despite Gruden's attempts to smooth things over, the team fined Brown and voided his guaranteed money, leading him to demand his release. Incredibly, the Raiders obliged, cutting Brown before he ever played a single snap for the team. For the Raiders, the fallout was disastrous. Not only did they lose the draft capital used to acquire Brown, but they also wasted months dealing with distractions that disrupted their preparation for the season. The move became a cautionary tale about taking a gamble on high-risk players, even those with elite talent. Brown's departure was just the beginning of his chaotic journey, as he signed with the New England Patriots shortly afterward, only to be released amid allegations of sexual misconduct. For the Raiders, the trade remains a glaring misstep, a reminder that talent alone cannot overcome dysfunction and drama. What was supposed to be a game-changing acquisition ended up being one of the most infamous trades in franchise history. The Dallas Cowboys' trade for wide receiver Roy Williams in 2008 was an ambitious attempt to bolster their offense, but it quickly turned into one of the most lopsided trades in recent NFL history. Midway through the 2008 season, the Cowboys sent a first-round pick, a third-round pick, and a sixth-round pick to the Detroit Lions in exchange for Williams and a seventh-round pick. At the time, it seemed like a worthwhile gamble for Dallas. Williams, a former Pro Bowler, had shown flashes of brilliance in Detroit despite inconsistent quarterback play, and was expected to thrive with Tony Romo under center. However, the move proved to be a disaster for the Cowboys. After arriving in Dallas, Williams struggled to adapt to the team's system and failed to establish chemistry with Romo. In 10 games during the 2008 season, he caught just 19 passes for 198 yards and a single touchdown. Despite his underwhelming performance, the Cowboys inexplicably doubled down on their investment, signing Williams to a massive 5-year, $45 million extension with $20 million guaranteed. Williams' play in Dallas never lived up to his hefty price tag. Over the next 2 seasons, he was plagued by dropped passes, poor route running, and a lack of explosiveness. In 2009, he managed just 596 yards and 7 touchdowns despite being targeted 86 times. By 2010, Williams was relegated to a secondary role behind emerging stars like Miles Austin and Dez Bryant. He finished his Cowboys tenure with only 1,300 yards and 13 touchdowns in 40 games before being released in 2011. Meanwhile, the Lions reaped the rewards of the trade. The first-round pick they received from Dallas was used to select tight end Brandon Pettigrew, who became a productive player for several seasons. For Detroit, the trade symbolized a turning point in their rebuilding efforts, while for Dallas, it highlighted the dangers of overpaying for star players without a clear fit. The Roy Williams trade remains one of the worst in Cowboys history. The Herschel Walker trade, executed in 1989, is widely regarded as one of the most lopsided deals in NFL history, setting the Dallas Cowboys on a path to dynasty status while leaving the Minnesota Vikings with little to show for their investment. At the time, Walker was one of the league's premier running backs, and the Vikings believed he was the missing piece to push their already competitive team to Super Bowl contention. What followed, however, reshaped both franchises in dramatically different ways. The Cowboys traded Walker, along with 4 mid to late round draft picks, to the Vikings in exchange for 5 players and a stunning 8 draft picks, including 3 first-rounders and 3 second-rounders. While Minnesota hoped Walker would spearhead their offense, he struggled to integrate into their system. Although he had a couple of notable games early on, including a 148-yard debut, his production declined, and he never became the transformative player the Vikings envisioned. Over 2.5 seasons in Minnesota, Walker averaged a modest 67 rushing yards per game and scored just 20 total touchdowns before leaving via free agency. Meanwhile, Dallas used the haul from the trade to rebuild their roster under head coach Jimmy Johnson. Most notably, the Cowboys leveraged the draft capital to select cornerstone players such as running back Emmitt Smith, safety Darren Woodson, and defensive tackle Russell Maryland. These players, combined with existing stars like quarterback Troy Aikman and wide receiver Michael Irvin, formed the core of a team that won 3 Super Bowls in the 1990s. The trade highlighted the importance of draft capital and roster building strategies in the NFL. While While Minnesota aimed for an immediate splash, Dallas played the long game and reaped the benefits. For the Vikings, the trade remains a brutal tale about the risks of overpaying for a single player. For the Cowboys, it stands as a masterstroke that transformed a struggling franchise into one of the most dominant teams in NFL history. The DeAndre Hopkins trade between the Houston Texans and the Arizona Cardinals in 2020 remains one of the most puzzling transactions in modern NFL history. Hopkins, widely regarded as one of the league's premier wide receivers, was traded by the Texans along with a 4th-round pick in exchange for running back David Johnson, a 2nd-round pick, and a future 4th-round pick. The deal was widely criticized and left Texans fans questioning the direction of their franchise. At the time of the trade, Hopkins was coming off his 3rd consecutive All-Pro season and was the centerpiece of Houston's offense. Known for his incredible hands, route running, and ability to produce regardless of who was throwing him the ball, Hopkins had established himself as one of the most reliable weapons in the league. Despite his stellar production, then Texans head coach and general manager Bill O'Brien decided to part ways with the star receiver. Reports suggested a strained relationship between Hopkins and O'Brien, including disputes over contract demands, played a significant role in the decision. The Cardinals, on the other hand, were the clear winners of the trade. Pairing Hopkins with young quarterback Kyler Murray gave Arizona an elite offensive duo. Hopkins had an immediate impact, finishing his first season in Arizona with 115 receptions for 1,400 yards and 6 touchdowns, including a memorable Hail Mary catch against the Buffalo Bills. His presence elevated the Cardinals' offense and positioned them as a rising contender in the NFC. The Texans' return in the trade was underwhelming. David Johnson, once an elite running back, was coming off an injury-plagued season and struggled to recapture his previous form. While Johnson had some productive games in Houston, his impact paled in comparison to Hopkins' dominance. Combined with the Texans' struggles and O'Brien's eventual firing later that season, the trade became emblematic of the franchise's mismanagement during that era. The Hopkins trade is now widely viewed as one of the worst trades in NFL history. It not only significantly weakened the Texans' roster, but also bolstered a Cardinals team that now enjoys one of the league's most dynamic receivers. For Texans fans, it serves as a reminder of how quickly poor decision-making can derail a franchise's success. The Texans' return in the trade was underwhelming. David Johnson, once an elite running back, was coming off an injury-plagued season and struggled to recapture his previous form. While Johnson had some productive games in Houston, his impact paled in comparison to Hopkins' dominance. Combined with the Texans' struggles and O'Brien's eventual firing later that season, the trade became emblematic of the franchise's mismanagement during that era. The Hopkins trade is now widely viewed as one of the worst trades in NFL history. It not only significantly weakened the Texans' roster, but also bolstered a Cardinals team that now enjoys one of the league's most dynamic receivers. For Texans fans, it serves as a reminder of how quickly poor decision-making can derail a franchise's success. Those are just 10 of some of the most lopsided trades in NFL history. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to press the like button and let me know in the comment section down below what you thought of the video. We post videos like this several times a week and are trying to reach 10,000 subscribers by the end of the year. Thank you for watching.